It was good while it lasted, says wife handing divorce papers on husband's birthday. The candles on Richard's birthday cake illuminated his stunned face as he stared at the documents Jennifer had just placed on the table. The intimate dinner she had prepared in their luxurious Upper East Side apartment in New York City had turned into a moment that would forever change the course of their two-decade marriage. It was good while it lasted, Jennifer said, her voice firmer than it had been in years. Her auburn hair, carefully pinned into an elegant bun, and the black dress she wore gave her an air of dignity that contrasted with the inner turmoil she felt. Richard swallowed hard, his gaze shifting between the cake with its 50 lit candles and the divorce papers. The law firm's initials at the top of the page seemed to burn hotter than the candles themselves. "Ah, you can't be serious, Jennifer. Today on my birthday?" He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. 23 years together, and you choose this moment? And what would be the ideal moment, Richard? She countered, maintaining her composure. When you're toasting on your yacht with your partners, or when you're too busy answering messages during our dinners. Maybe on the weekends you spend working. The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the antique clock they had bought in Savannah during their honeymoon. Richard ran a hand through the grey hair at his temples, a gesture she knew well, a sign he was trying to strategize an escape, just as he did in meetings at the construction company he ran. "We can talk about this. We don't have to rush," he finally said, stalling as he did with clients when a deal was about to collapse. Jennifer gave a sad smile. 3 years of couples therapy. Does that seem rushed to you? She sat in the chair across from him. The problem, Richard, is you never had time to talk. You had time to build skyscrapers, time for business dinners, time for golf with clients, but never for us. As the candles continued to burn, memories of the last 23 years flickered through both their minds like a silent film. The Manhattan apartment they had worked so hard for, the postponed dreams of children while building financial stability, the vacations that always ended with Richard on the phone solving company problems. "You know our marriage ended 3 months. Haggard," she continued, "when I found the messages on your phone." Richard's face paled. The candlelight now revealed beads of sweat on his forehead. "That was a mistake, Jennifer. A moment of weakness that—" "Please," she cut him off with a wave. "Don't insult me with excuses. 23 years made me many things, but it didn't make me a fool." The cake, once a symbol of celebration, now felt like a cruel irony between them. The candles began to melt, just like the marriage they had once believed unshakable. "Do you have someone else?" he asked abruptly. The question caught her off guard, and a bitter laugh escaped Jennifer's lips. "That's your concern? Whether I have another man?" She shook her head. "No, Richard. What I have is the clarity that I deserve more than the crumbs of attention you give me. The awareness that at 45 I can still rebuild my life." Richard stared at the woman before him. The auburn hair that had enchanted him when they met at the School of Architecture seemed even more vibrant in the apartment's soft light. He had forgotten how determined she was before the demands of the construction company consumed all his time before business success became his only measure of worth. "You gave up your career for me," he said, as if only now realizing the weight of that sacrifice. "I gave up my career for us," she corrected, "to build something together. But you built your empire alone, Richard, and you left me as a spectator in your life, not as a partner." Jennifer's words hit Richard like a physical blow. Behind his facade of a successful executive, he felt a void he had ignored for years, filling it with more work, more professional achievements, more external recognition. "Dinner is served in the kitchen," she said, standing up. "No need to waste the food. We can have one last civilized meal before we go our separate ways." Richard remained seated, staring at the candles that were now melting rapidly. "Aren't you going to blow out the candles?" Jennifer asked. "What would be the point of making a wish now?" he replied with a sad smile. With a soft breath, Jennifer extinguished the 50 flames, leaving only the scent of melted wax and a thin trail of smoke rising in the air. The momentary darkness seemed to symbolize the end of an era and the uncertain beginning of another. In the kitchen, the aroma of shrimp risotto, Richard's favorite dish, filled the room. Jennifer poured 2 glasses of red wine, a Californian, Cabernet they had discovered together on a trip to Napa Valley years ago. To the next chapter, she raised her glass, trying to maintain her composure. Richard hesitated before raising his. How did we get here, Jennifer? A question that carried the weight of 2 decades of choices, sacrifices, and silences. Gradually, then suddenly, she replied, quoting a line she'd read in some book, like all the things we lose in life. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now back to the story. The evening wore on as they shared that strangely intimate meal. The tense atmosphere was occasionally broken by comments about the food or lighter memories from their early years together. Every so often, their eyes met over their wine glasses, and in those brief moments there seemed to be more mutual understanding than they'd had in years. Do you remember our first apartment? Richard asked after a long silence. That tiny place in Park Slope. Jennifer smiled despite herself. How could I forget? Our bed barely fit, along with that monstrous drafting table you insisted on keeping. So as it was a relic from school, he defended, feeling momentarily young again. I drew our first project together on it. The renovation of your mother's house in the suburbs, she finished. Mrs. Elaine nearly had a fit when she saw we'd knocked down the kitchen wall. They laughed together for the first time in months, maybe years. It was a melancholy laugh, heavy with the awareness that they were reminiscing about a life they would no longer share. I know I wasn't the husband you deserved, Jennifer, Richard said after a moment. But I want you to know I never stopped loving you. Jennifer set her fork down slowly. Love isn't enough, Richard. It never was. We needed presence, partnership, daily choices that showed the other person was a priority. And at some point, I stopped being yours. He opened his mouth to argue but knew she was right. The warnings had come years earlier, the last-minute cancelled dinners, the postponed anniversary trips because of unavoidable meetings, the nights he came home too, late to find her already asleep. Small everyday betrayals that, added up, weighed more than any single grand betrayal. What happened to those young architecture students full of dreams, he asked, more to himself than to her. They grew in different directions, Jennifer replied. You've become a brilliant businessman, Richard. Built an empire, respected in the industry. And you gave up on your dreams. No, I postponed them. I thought we'd build something together, remember? Wilson and Taylor Architecture. That was the plan. Richard remembered well. The business card they'd designed together was still tucked away in some drawer. A dream filed away with so many others. It's never too late to start over, he said impulsively. Jennifer stared at him with a mix of surprise and skepticism. What are you saying? What if... We tried again, his voice faltered. If I sold part of the company, reduced my responsibilities, we could finally open our firm together, travel more, have the child we always wanted. For a brief moment, Jennifer allowed herself to imagine that possibility. The alternate future they could have had. But then she remembered the messages she'd found on his phone, the countless lonely nights, the broken promises. No, Richard, she said firmly. We can't go back. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. A heavy silence fell between them. Richard poured more wine for them both, his hands slightly trembling. So now what? He finally asked. Now we move forward, she replied. The papers are already with my lawyer. I'm asking for a fair division of assets. I don't want to fight, Richard, just what's rightfully mine after all these years. The apartment is yours, he said suddenly. It was always more yours than mine. You chose every detail, every piece of furniture. It's not just about the apartment. I know, but it's a start. I promise I won't make things difficult, Jennifer. She nodded, grateful for the promise. She knew all too well about divorces that dragged on for years, turning former spouses into bitter enemies. The dessert remained untouched. The birthday cake, its candles blown out, was a silent reminder of what they were leaving behind. Do you remember our first anniversary? Together? Richard asked, gazing at the cake. Jennifer smiled at the memory. You were so busy with your thesis you completely forgot. And you showed up at the model lab at midnight with a cupcake and a candle. So we can celebrate together, even when the world conspires against us. She quoted her own words from that distant night. The ironic contrast with the present moment wasn't lost on either of them. They finished the meal in contemplative silence. Richard helped clear the plates, a rare gesture Jennifer didn't miss. Small kindnesses that only surfaced when it was too late. In the living room, the divorce papers still lay on the table beside the untouched cake. Richard picked them up, flipping through slowly. "I'll have my lawyer review them," he said, "but I don't intend to contest anything that's fair." Jennifer nodded. Part of her had hoped he'd fight harder, beg for another chance. But maybe this resigned acceptance was the final confirmation they were making the right choice. "Where will you stay?" she asked, realizing they hadn't discussed the immediate practicalities. "I booked a flat near the office. For now, I'll look for something permanent later." His preparedness surprised her. Richard had always been organized in business, but rarely applied that skill to his personal life. "You are already preparing for this, then?" It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "I felt us drifting further apart. I'm not as oblivious as I seem, Jennifer." She watched him tuck the documents into the leather briefcase he always carried, a symbol of his corporate world. For a moment, she glimpsed the young student she'd once known, hidden beneath the layers of the successful executive he'd become. "Can I grab some clothes now?" he asked. "I'll come back another time for the rest." "Of course. I can help you if you'd like." Together they climbed the spiral staircase leading to the master bedroom. The room they had shared for over 2 decades was impeccably tidy, just as they always kept it. Jennifer opened the spacious closet, where Richard's clothes occupied half the space. He took down a suitcase they kept on the top shelf, the one he used for his frequent business trips. As she watched him select suits, shirts, and personal items, Jennifer felt a pang of nostalgia. How many times had she helped him pack for trips? The difference was that this time, he wouldn't be back. In a few days. "You always folded the shirts wrong," she remarked, automatically picking up a navy blue shirt he had just packed and refolding it properly. Richard smiled at the gesture. Some things never change. But they both knew everything was changing, irreversibly. When the suitcase was ready, they went back downstairs to the living room. Richard looked around as if trying to memorize every detail of the apartment. His eyes landed on a photograph on the shelf. The two of them, much younger, on the beach in Cape Cod with wide, carefree smiles. "We may not have worked out as a couple, but we had good times, didn't we?" he asked, his voice cracking for the first time that night. "Yes, we did," Jennifer agreed, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. "That's why it hurts so much. If it had been bad from the start, it would be easier." Richard nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Can I hug you?" he asked hesitantly. "One last time." In response, Jennifer stepped forward, letting his arms wrap around her. The hug carried the familiarity of 2 decades, but also the strangeness of goodbye. When they pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. "Take care, Jennifer." "You too, Richard." He picked up the suitcase and walked to the door. For a moment, it seemed like he might say something else, but he just nodded and left. The click of the door closing sounded final. Alone in the apartment that suddenly felt too big, Jennifer let the tears flow freely. They weren't just tears of sadness, but also of relief, fear, and surprisingly hope. She walked to the dining table and looked at the untouched birthday cake. With a decisive motion, she picked up a knife and cut a slice. She took a bite, tasting the bitter sweetness of the moment. An ending and a beginning, all in the same night. She glanced at her phone and saw it was past midnight. Technically, it was no longer Richard's birthday. It was just the first day of the rest of her life. By the time the sun rose over the New York City skyline, illuminating the Upper East Side apartment, Jennifer was already awake. She hadn't slept much, alternating between crying and moments of strange serenity. Standing on the balcony with a cup of coffee in her hands, she watched as the beach below began to come alive. 24 hours ago, she had been planning a birthday dinner, pretending everything was fine. Now, she was officially in the process of getting a divorce after 23 years of marriage. The speed of the change was disorienting. Her phone rang, displaying her younger sister Emily's name. "Hello," she answered, trying to sound more composed than she felt. "Jennifer, how are you? I was worried when I saw your message last night." The night before, after Richard left, Jennifer had sent her sister a short text. "I did it. I gave him the papers. It's over." "I'm surviving," she replied honestly, "still processing everything." "Do you want me to come over? I can catch the first flight from Chicago." "No need, Em. I think I need this time alone, to get used to it." "How did he take it?" Jennifer thought about the surreal civil dinner they'd shared, the memories they'd exchanged, the final hug. "Better than I expected. I think deep down, he knew it was inevitable too." "And the messages with that assistant, did he admit it?" "I didn't even bring it up," confessed Jennifer. "It seemed irrelevant, you know? Just a symptom, not the cause." On the other end of the line, Emily sighed. "I'm proud of you, Jen. I know how much courage that took." Her sister's supportive words brought fresh tears to Jennifer's eyes. For years, Emily had silently watched her marriage deteriorate, offering a shoulder to lean on and an ear to listen without ever judging. "Thanks, Em. I'll call you later, okay? I need to sort out some practical things." After hanging up, Jennifer walked back into the apartment. There was a mental checklist of tasks to tackle: contact her lawyer, inform close friends, start reorganizing her finances. But first, she needed a moment for herself. She headed to the office she rarely used. The old desk, an heirloom from her grandfather, was covered in decor magazines and opened mail. She pulled open the bottom drawer and took out a dusty yellow folder. Inside was her old architectural portfolio, college projects and some sketches for the beach house she and Richard had once dreamed of building. She flipped through the yellowed pages, remembering the talented young architect she had been, full of innovative ideas and a desire to leave her mark on the world. At some point, along the way, she had let her dreams take a back seat to Richard's career. Wilson Construction had grown exponentially, while her drafting boards were gradually replaced by social dinners and charity events where she played the role of the successful businessman's wife. "No more," she murmured to herself, closing the folder with determination. Her phone rang again. This time it was Rebecca, her oldest friend, who lived in the same building a few floors down. "The rumors have already started," Rebecca said without preamble. "I just got a text from Amanda asking if it's true that you and Richard split up." Jennifer sighed. The speed at which news traveled in their social circle was no surprise. "Expected as much. Want me to come up? I have a bottle of sparkling wine in the fridge. We can call it a liberation brunch." Despite everything, Jennifer laughed. "It's only 8 a.m., Rebecca. So what? Champagne works for any meal, especially when we're celebrating the end of failed relationships." "I'm not sure celebrating is the right word." "Marking a new beginning, then. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Before Jennifer could protest, Rebecca had hung up, knowing her friend, trying to dissuade her, would be pointless. Exactly 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Rebecca walked in, carrying not just a bottle of sparkling wine, but also a bag of fresh croissants and fruit. "You look terrible," she declared, eyeing Jennifer up and down. "But considering the circumstances, you're holding up pretty well." Rebecca, at 48, was Jennifer's opposite in many ways. Twice divorced, owner of a contemporary art gallery in Chelsea, she lived boldly and without regrets. Her short platinum hair matched her fearless personality. "So, how did it go?" she asked, expertly popping the bottle open. Jennifer recounted the events of the previous night as Rebecca poured 2 glasses and arranged the croissants on a plate. "No drama, no shouting, accusations, smashed plates. What a disappointment," Rebecca teased. "You two have always been the most civilized couple I know. Even your breakup is orderly." Jennifer gave a half smile. There was an uncomfortable truth in her friend's words. Even in their worst moments, she and Richard had maintained a facade of perfection, avoiding direct confrontations, swallowing resentments, keeping up appearances. "I think that was part of the problem," she reflected. "There was no passion. Not just romantically, but the passion for changing things, for fighting for what we wanted. We settled." Rebecca watched her with a mix of understanding and compassion. "And now? What are your plans?" The question hung in the air as Jennifer took a sip of her sparkling drink. It was the question that had haunted her most during her sleepless night. "I don't know exactly," she admitted. "Financially, I'm secure. The division of assets will be fair. But professionally, personally, it's like starting from scratch at 45. From scratch, but with experience, connections, and an education no one can take from you," Rebecca reminded her. "You were a brilliant architect, Jen." It's been over 15 years since I practiced. So what? Architecture is like riding a bike. A little practice and you'll get back into the rhythm. Jennifer laughed at the absurd simplification, but appreciated her friend's optimism. It's not that simple. The market has changed, techniques have evolved, and that's what professional development is for. Courses, internships if needed. Rebecca paused as if considering something. "Actually, I have a proposal for you. The gallery is about to open a new annex space. We need someone to redesign the interior, adapt the place for exhibitions. Why not you?" Jennifer stared at her friend, surprised. "Are you serious?" "Never more serious. It would be the perfect project for you to re-enter the market. Relatively small but significant, and I'm sure other opportunities will follow." The offer was tempting. A real project, not just a nostalgic exercise of returning to the profession. "I'll think about it," Jennifer replied, feeling a spark of enthusiasm she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Don't overthink it. That's always been your flaw." Rebecca took another croissant. "You analyze possibilities. So much you end up paralyzed. That's how it was when you decided to postpone having children, remember?" The comment hit a nerve. The child they never had was one of Jennifer's biggest regrets. First, they'd decided to wait to stabilize Richard's career. Then, when the construction company started growing, the timing never seemed right. When they finally felt ready, fertility issues arose, and after several failed attempts, they gave up on the dream. "That was a low blow, Rebecca. I'm sorry." Her friend seemed genuinely remorseful. "I just don't want you to let more opportunities slip away." Jennifer's phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello? Mrs. Jennifer Taylor?" asked a formal voice on the other end. "This is Jonathan Murphy from the law firm Murphy & Goldstein. I'm calling at the request of Mr. Michael Wilson." Jennifer frowned. Michael was Richard's older brother, a minority partner in the construction company and the corporate lawyer for the family business. "Yes, I'm listening." "Mr. Michael would like to schedule a meeting with you today if possible. An urgent matter regarding the separation." The formal tone and urgency alarmed her. Was this the real Richard emerging? The ruthless businessman she knew from corporate dinners, preparing a legal strategy to undermine her? "I thought we'd handle this through our personal attorneys," she replied cautiously. "I understand your concern, ma'am. But Mr. Michael insists it's in both parties' interest that this meeting happens as soon as possible. Could it be at 2 p.m. at the main office of Wilson Construction?" Jennifer looked at Rebecca, who was watching the conversation with curiosity. "I'll be there," she finally replied, ending the call. "What was that about?" Rebecca asked, concerned. "Richard's brother wants to see me urgently, at the construction company's office." "And you're going? Just like that, alone?" "I am," Jennifer confirmed, feeling a growing determination. "But not alone, I'll have my attorney come with me." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us tremendously as we're just starting out. Now continuing. At 1:45 p.m., Jennifer crossed the grand lobby of Wilson Construction in downtown Manhattan. The 20-story building, with its modern glass and concrete facade, was one of the first major projects Richard had executed, cementing his name in New York City's real estate market. By her side walked Mr. David Stern, her lawyer, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor that exuded confidence. They had worked together weeks earlier, preparing the divorce papers, but Jennifer never imagined she'd need his presence so soon in the process. "Remember," Mr. David said as they stepped into the private elevator reserved for executives, "don't sign anything until I've reviewed it first. And if you feel any pressure at all, we'll end the meeting immediately." Jennifer nodded, nervously adjusting the navy blue blazer she'd chosen for the occasion. She had opted for a professional yet understated look, tailored slacks, a cream silk blouse and her auburn hair pulled back into the same elegant bun she'd worn the night before. She wanted to be seen as the professional she once was, not just as Richard's wife. The elevator opened directly into the executive floor's reception area. Megan, the secretary Jennifer had known for years, seemed momentarily uncomfortable upon seeing her. "Mrs. Wilson. I mean Ms. Taylor," she quickly corrected herself. "Mr. Michael is waiting in the main office." The use of her maiden name didn't go unnoticed. News certainly traveled fast. When they entered the spacious conference room, Jennifer was surprised to see not just Michael but also Elaine, the matriarch of the Wilson family. At 75, Mrs. Elaine maintained the poised elegance and sharp gaze that had defined her ever since Jennifer first met her, back when she was still Richard's girlfriend in architecture school. "Jennifer, dear." Mrs. Elaine rose to greet her with a careful hug. What an unfortunate situation. Her tone held no accusation, only genuine sorrow. Michael, on the other hand, remained formal and distant, merely nodding in acknowledgement. "I see you've brought legal representation," he observed, gesturing to Mr. David. "As have you," Jennifer replied, noticing the presence of a young woman with a tablet seated discreetly in the corner. "Ms. Sarah is our in-house legal consultant," Michael explained. "But we're not here for legal battles, Jennifer. Quite the opposite." The tension in the room was palpable as everyone settled around the large oval conference table. At the head of the table sat an empty chair, Richard's usual place. "He's not coming?" Jennifer asked, referring to her soon-to-be ex-husband. "Richard is in Washington, D.C., Michael informed her, an emergency meeting with investors that couldn't be postponed. "Business first, as always," Jennifer remarked, unable to hide the bitterness in her voice. Mrs. Elaine gave her a knowing look. "That's precisely what I wanted to discuss, Jennifer," the older woman interjected, "about how business has always come first in this family and how it's destroyed more than one marriage." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mother, we're here to address practical matters." "And what could be more practical than understanding the mistakes of the past, Michael?" Mrs. Elaine countered with the authority only mothers wield over their grown children. Turning back to Jennifer, she continued, "I've seen the same pattern repeat itself. First with your father-in-law, then with Michael, and finally with Richard. The company always comes first, family second. That's how I lost my husband to another woman, and how Michael lost Rebecca." Michael visibly stiffened in his chair. His turbulent divorce 7 years prior was still a sore subject. "What my mother is trying to say," he interrupted, regaining control of the conversation, "is that we understand your decision, Jennifer, and we want to ensure the process is as fair and smooth as possible." Mr. David Stern, who had been silent until then, leaned forward slightly. "That's admirable, Mr. Michael. But then what's the reason for the urgency of this meeting?" Michael gestured to the legal consultant, who slid a few folders across the table. "Last night, after speaking with Richard, our legal department prepared a preliminary settlement proposal. We'd like you to review it." Mr. David opened the folder and began examining the documents while Jennifer tried to peer over his shoulder. The terms appeared surprisingly generous. In addition to an equal division of assets acquired during the marriage, Richard was offering shares in the construction company equivalent to 8% of the business. "This is unexpected," Mr. David remarked, clearly surprised by the terms. "My son may have been a terrible husband, but he's not an unfair man," declared Mrs. Elaine. "He recognizes the role Jennifer played in the company's growth, even without formally working there." Jennifer felt a lump in her throat. For years she had watched the company expand, sacrificing her own professional dreams to be the support Richard needed, the client dinners at their home, the social events where she played a crucial role in building relationships, the advice she gave on projects, drawing on her training at the School of Architecture. "There is one condition, however," Michael added, pointing to the last page of the agreement. Mr. David continued reading, and his expression shifted subtly. "You want Jennifer to take on an executive role at the construction company as director of architectural projects?" The revelation left Jennifer momentarily speechless. Of all the possibilities she had imagined for this meeting, this one certainly hadn't made the list. It was Richard's idea, Michael explained. He always said, "The company's best projects had your touch, Jennifer. Your aesthetic vision, your focus on sustainability and functionality. I don't understand," Jennifer finally found her words. "We're getting divorced. Why would he offer me a position at the company?" Mrs. Elaine leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Jennifer's. "Because he finally understood what I've always tried to tell him. A company is just a collection of walls and papers. It's the people, the talents, the relationships that make the difference. And you, my dear, have always had an exceptional talent that this company wasted." The offer was tempting and unsettling at the same time. Returning to architecture, taking on an executive role, gaining professional recognition, but doing it side by side with the man she was divorcing. "I need time to think," Jennifer said, looking to her lawyer for support. "Of course," Mr. David agreed. "My client needs to carefully consider all the implications of this proposal. I assume we can have a few days to respond?" Michael nodded. "Absolutely. We don't want to pressure you. Just present an alternative we believe benefits everyone." When the meeting ended, Jennifer felt emotionally drained. She said a formal goodbye to Michael and a warmer one to Mrs. Elaine, who hugged her tightly. "Whatever you decide about the company, you'll always be part of the family, Jennifer," the older woman whispered in her ear. "Some connections go beyond divorce papers." In the elevator, descending to the lobby, Mr. David finally shared his thoughts. "It's a generous offer, financially better than we expected. But there's the emotional aspect to consider," Jennifer mused. "Working daily in the same environment as Richard, you wouldn't need to interact constantly," he reassured her. "As director, you would have considerable autonomy." Jennifer thought about the building they were in, about the dozens of projects Wilson Construction had scattered across the city, about the empire she had helped build, even if indirectly. "I need to talk to him before deciding anything," she concluded. "Face to face, not through lawyers, and documents." As she left the building into the warm New York City afternoon, Jennifer felt her phone vibrate. It was a message from Richard. "Heard you were at the meeting. Sorry I couldn't be there. I'm back from Washington, D.C. tomorrow. Can we talk? Dinner at Le Bernardin at 8? Jennifer stared at the message for a long moment before replying with a simple yes. When she got home, she found Rebecca waiting eagerly for news. She recounted the surprising proposal, while her friend listened with growing disbelief. "Let me get this straight," Rebecca said, gesturing with the wine glass she had already poured for herself. "The man cheats on you, you ask for a divorce, and he offers you an executive position at his company? Is this brilliant or completely insane?" "Maybe a little of both," Jennifer replied. "I think he's genuinely trying to do the right thing." "Or trying to keep some control over you," Rebecca suggested, always more skeptical. "You may be divorcing, but if you work for him, you'll still be in his orbit, still dependent on him in some way." Her friend's observation raised a troubling possibility Jennifer hadn't considered yet. "I agreed to have dinner with him tomorrow to discuss it." "At Le Bernardin? That ridiculously romantic restaurant where he proposed to you?" Rebecca raised her eyebrows in disapproval. "Honey, this has emotional manipulation written all over it. Or maybe it's just a place where we can have a private conversation without being interrupted by acquaintances," Jennifer defended, though she wasn't entirely convinced herself. "Just be careful," Rebecca warned. 23. Years of marriage create patterns that are hard to break. Don't let him make you doubt your decision. That night, Jennifer struggled to sleep again. The silent apartment seemed to amplify her conflicting thoughts. Part of her was furious at Richard for believing he could soften 2 decades of emotional neglect with a generous financial and professional offer. Another part wondered if this could be a genuine opportunity for a fresh start, not for the marriage, but for her long-abandoned career. She got up and went to the room they used as an office. At the old desk, she opened her laptop and, after a moment of hesitation, typed into the browser, "Wilson Construction Recent Projects." The images that appeared showed imposing buildings, elegant residential complexes, an award-winning business center praised for its sustainable architecture. Jennifer knew every one of those projects. She had seen the blueprints, heard Richard talk about them during dinners, occasionally offered suggestions that she now realized had often been incorporated into the final result. Maybe I really did contribute more than I realized, she thought. In a rarely accessed digital folder, she found her own projects from school and her early years after graduation. Award-winning work, praised by professors, published in trade magazines. The promising young architect she had once been hadn't completely disappeared. She had just been dormant for too long. The next morning, Jennifer woke with renewed determination. She took a long shower, carefully picked out her outfit for the day, an emerald green dress that brought out her auburn hair, and sat down for coffee, weighing her options. Rebecca was right about the emotional risks of staying tied to Richard through the company. On the other hand, her friend's proposal to redesign the art gallery, though tempting, now seemed too small after glimpsing other possibilities. Her phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Ms. Taylor," asked a young woman's voice. "This is Stephanie Brooks, assistant to architect Robert Stevens." The name made Jennifer sit up straight. Robert Stevens was one of the country's most renowned architects, a professor she had admired during her time at the School of Architecture, and now the head of one of New York City's most innovative firms. "Yes, speaking. Mr. Stevens would like to schedule lunch with you. Would you be available today at 1 p.m. at the MoMA restaurant?" The surprise left Jennifer momentarily speechless. How did Robert Stevens know about her? Why would he want to meet? "Yes, I'm available," she finally replied. "But may I ask the reason for the invitation?" There was a pause on the other. "And Mr. Stevens prefers to discuss it in person, but he mentioned something about a joint project with Wilson Construction, a cultural center at the Brooklyn Navy Yard." After hanging up, Jennifer remained still, processing the information. A cultural center in the Navy Yard was exactly the kind of project she had always dreamed of developing. Sustainable, socially responsible, blending history and modernity. And Robert Stevens wanted to discuss it with her. Her first instinct was to call Richard and ask if he was behind this, but she resisted the urge. If she was truly reclaiming her independence, she needed to face this situation on her own. At 12:45 p.m., Jennifer entered the elegant restaurant at the Museum of Modern Art, overlooking New York Harbor. The place, with its brutalist architecture and stunning view, had always been one of her favorites in the city. Robert Stevens was already waiting. At 65, with graying hair and thick-framed glasses, he exuded the aura of a master in his craft. He stood to greet her with a warm smile. "Jennifer Taylor, we finally meet in person. I've long admired your work." She couldn't hide her surprise. "My work? But I've barely practiced in recent years." "I'm referring to your thesis on sustainable architecture in degraded urban areas. I still use it as a reference for my students at the School of Architecture." Jennifer felt her face flush. Her thesis, written nearly 2 decades ago, had been published in a specialized journal and then practically forgotten, by everyone it seemed, except Robert Stevens. "That's very kind of you," she replied as they sat down. "I must admit, I'm curious about the reason for this meeting." Robert gestured to the waiter, ordering water for both before answering. "I'm leading a joint project between my firm and Wilson Construction, a cultural center at the Navy Yard, as you were likely told. The project is in its early stages, but we're facing some conceptual challenges." "And how could I help?" "Your thesis addressed the exact problems we're encountering, how to integrate modern structures into degraded historic areas while respecting existing heritage and creating something functional and sustainable." Jennifer nodded, recalling the months of intensive research she had devoted to the work. "But I still don't understand why you're reaching out to me now." Robert studied her for a moment before answering. "It was Richard who suggested your name. He mentioned you'd be taking over as head of architectural projects at the construction firm and that this would be an excellent first project for your leadership." The revelation hit Jennifer like lightning. Had Richard already announced her acceptance of a position she hadn't even agreed to take? "I see from your expression there's been some misunderstanding," Robert observed astutely. "I was offered the position, but I haven't accepted yet," Jennifer explained, trying to control her rising irritation. "Actually, I'm considering my options." "I understand." Richard seemed momentarily uncomfortable. "I apologize if I was hasty. Michael gave the impression it was a done deal. The lunch continued, with the conversation shifting to technical aspects of the project. Despite her irritation with Richard, Jennifer found herself completely absorbed by Harold's ideas, occasionally offering suggestions that the architect noted with genuine interest. "You have exactly the vision we need for this project, Jennifer," he said as they finished dessert. "Regardless of your decision about the construction company, I'd like to invite you to be a special consultant for my firm on this cultural center. A freelance position, with no direct ties to Wilson Construction." The offer surprised Jennifer again. It was an alternative she hadn't considered, working on the project without necessarily being tied to her ex-husband's company. "I'd be honored," she replied sincerely, "but I need to sort out some personal matters before making any professional commitments." "Of course," Harold agreed. "Take all the time you need. The project can only benefit from your involvement, in whatever capacity you choose." As they said goodbye, Harold handed her a folder with preliminary studies. "For you to review when you have time. No pressure." Leaving the museum, Jennifer walked slowly through Hudson River Park, trying to organize her thoughts. The meeting with Harold had opened a third option she hadn't considered: resuming her career independently of Richard, leveraging the respect her academic work still commanded in the professional world. Her phone vibrated. A message from Richard. "Just landed at LaGuardia. Still on for tonight?" Jennifer replied affirmatively but added, "We have a lot to talk about." When she returned to her apartment, she found a floral arrangement at the front desk. White lilies, her favorite. The card read simply, "For new beginnings, R." The gesture, instead of pleasing her, only deepened her irritation. Richard always did this, grand gestures to make up for fundamental flaws. The expensive flowers didn't erase the fact that he was making decisions about her professional life without consulting her. She needed to prepare emotionally for tonight's meeting. She knew Richard would use all his charm and persuasive power to convince her to accept the construction company's proposal. And worse, part of her wanted to be convinced. Not this time, she promised herself, placing the flowers in a vase with renewed determination. At 7:45 p.m., Jennifer entered Le Bernardin, one of the most elegant restaurants in Manhattan. The place, with its soft lighting and sophisticated decor, looked practically the same as she remembered from her last visit 5 years ago, when they had celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Richard was already waiting at their usual table overlooking the water. When he saw her approach, he stood, flashing that same smile that had won her over in college. He wore an impeccable navy blue suit, likely bought on his last trip to Milan. "You look beautiful," he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. Jennifer allowed the gesture, but remained reserved, sitting before he could pull out the chair for her, a small act of independence that didn't go unnoticed. "Thank you for the flowers," she said formally. "It wasn't necessary." "I know," Richard replied, resuming his seat, "but I wanted to send them anyway." A sommelier approached to suggest wines, and Richard ordered the Californian Cabernet they both enjoyed. Another detail showing how well he knew which buttons to push to disarm her. "How was Washington, D.C.?" she asked, opting for a neutral topic. "Productive. We got the approval for the port area project funding." He paused significantly. "The same project Robert Stevens discussed with you today. So he already knew about the lunch, of course he did." "About that," Jennifer straightened in her chair, determined not to delay the confrontation, "I didn't appreciate you talking about my supposed position at the construction company before I even made a decision." Richard had the decency to look embarrassed. "It was rash of me, I admit, but I was so excited about the possibility that I got ahead of myself." "As you have so many times before," she remarked, unable to hide the bitterness. The sommelier returned with the wine, going through the presentation and tasting ritual. When they were finally alone again, Richard leaned forward, his expression more serious. "Jennifer, I know I've made many mistakes over the years. The biggest was not valuing your talent, your intelligence. When Michael suggested we offer you a position at the company as part of the settlement, I realized it was the perfect chance to correct that mistake. It's fascinating how you can turn a divorce into a business opportunity," she said, irritated by how easily he shifted between the personal and professional. That's always been your strength, hasn't it? Seeing the practical side of everything. Richard took a sip of wine before responding. I'm trying to do the right thing, Jennifer. For you, for us, even if there's no romantic us anymore. What exactly are you proposing, Richard? Because I feel there's more to this than just a generous job offer and asset division. He sighed, as if weighing how honest he should be. The port area project is the most important one we've ever taken on. It's not just another real estate venture, he explained, his voice taking on the passionate tone Jennifer knew well, the one he reserved for talking about architecture and construction. That's a chance to transform a neglected part of the city, to create something that combines historic preservation, sustainability, and positive social impact. And what does that have to do with me, aside from the fact that my thesis touched on similar themes? Everything, he replied emphatically. When Robert mentioned the challenges they were facing, I immediately thought of your work, of your innovative ideas that he hesitated, that I never properly supported. This is a chance to bring to life what we once dreamed of together, Jennifer, not as husband and wife, but as professionals who respect each other. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. For a moment, she glimpsed the idealistic young man she'd met in architecture school, before the corporate world turned him into the calculating executive he'd become. Robert offered me an independent consulting role on the project, she revealed. No ties to the construction company. Richard seemed genuinely surprised but recovered quickly. That would be acceptable. Not what I imagined, but just as valid. What exactly did you imagine? The two of us, working side by side on this. You bringing the architectural vision I've always admired, me handling the financial and operational side. The professional partnership we should have formed from the start instead of me becoming just the businessman's wife, she finished. I never saw you that way, Richard protested. But that's what happened, wasn't it? Jennifer pressed. Between managing client dinners and attending charity events as your plus one, my professional identity faded. And you let it happen. The waiter approached to take their orders. Both, distracted by the intensity of the conversation, chose dishes almost at random. When they were alone again, Richard placed his hand over hers on the table, a gesture she allowed momentarily. You're right. I allowed it and worse encouraged this erasure of your career because it was convenient for me, for the company, he admitted, with an honesty that surprised her. But now I'm trying to fix it the only way I know how. Jennifer gently withdrew her hand. By offering me an executive position as compensation for a failed marriage. Not as compensation, Richard corrected. As recognition of your worth, of your talent, of your contribution, even if indirect, to the success of the construction company. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The dinner continued with a strange mix of formality and intimacy. They talked about technical aspects of the Brooklyn Navy Yard project, changes in the real estate market, and old classmates from the School of Architecture. Safe, professional topics that avoided the still open wound of their failing relationship. When dessert arrived, a tiramisu they shared, as they always did, Richard finally broached the subject hanging over them. What about the messages you found on my phone, he asked, surprising Jennifer with his directness. We never really talked about it. Jennifer set down her spoon, the sweetness suddenly fading from her mouth. What's there to say? You were exchanging intimate messages with your assistant, a woman 15 years younger, the perfect midlife executive cliché. Richard stared into his glass of wine, as if searching for words in the depths of the red liquid. Nothing physical happened between us, he finally said. If that makes any difference. It might make a difference to your ego, Jennifer replied, more hurt than she wanted to show. For me, the betrayal started long before those messages. It started when you stopped seeing me, listening to me, including me in your life. I know, Richard admitted. The messages were just a symptom of something that had been broken for a long time, and that's why I didn't argue when you asked for a divorce. Because deep down I knew you deserved more than I was giving you. His honesty disarmed her. It would have been easier if he'd denied it, if he'd tried to manipulate the situation, if he'd acted like the villain she wanted him to be. But by owning his guilt, he forced her to confront her own responsibilities in their marriage's failure. "I have my share of the blame too," she acknowledged after a moment. "I let myself be pushed into a supporting role. I didn't fight hard. Enough for my dreams, for my career. I settled in the shadow of your success. Then maybe this is a chance for both of us," Richard suggested. "For you to reclaim your professional identity, for me to learn to value talents beyond my own." Jennifer studied him for a long moment. The man across from her was at once deeply familiar. She knew every expression, every tone of his voice, and yet a stranger revealing sides of himself he'd rarely shown during their marriage. "Why now, Richard? Why this sudden interest in fixing things when we've already decided to go our separate ways?" Richard rested his elbows on the table, interlacing his fingers in that thoughtful gesture she knew so well. "Because when you put those papers on the table last night next to my birthday cake, I realized I was losing not just my wife, but one of the sharpest minds I've ever known. And as a businessman, I can't let talent like that slip away," he added with a half-smile, softening the bluntness of his statement. "But mostly, Jennifer, because I want us to part without resentment. I want us to look at each other years from now and think, we did what was right in the end." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Despite all the accumulated hurt, Jennifer felt a lump in her throat. 23 years of shared history couldn't simply be erased, no matter how painful the ending. "I need to think," she finally said. "About the project, about the construction company's offer, about everything." "Of course," Richard agreed. "Take all the time you need. Just know that regardless of your decision, the terms of the divorce agreement remain the same. I'm not tying your share in the company to your acceptance of the position. It was an important clarification, one that eased one of Jennifer's biggest fears. Thank you for making that clear." When the bill arrived, there was a moment of hesitation over who would pay, a small detail that symbolized the awkward transition from couple to whatever they were becoming. In the end, Richard insisted on paying. "Please, let me do this. Perhaps my last dinner paying as your husband." Jennifer accepted with a nod, acknowledging the symbolic weight of the gesture for them both. As they stepped out of the restaurant, the New York City night enveloped them with its warm spring breeze. They stood awkwardly on the sidewalk for a moment, like acquaintances unsure how to say goodbye. "Would you like me to drive you home?" Richard offered. "No, thank you. I've already called a ride," she replied, showing her phone. While they waited for the car, Richard gazed up at the starry sky, a rare sight in the brightly lit city. "Remember that time in the Hamptons, when we lay on the beach counting stars?" he asked, nostalgic. "Our third dating anniversary," Jennifer recalled, allowing herself a smile at the memory. "You promised we'd build a beach house with a glass ceiling one day so we could see the stars from bed." "Another promise I didn't keep," Richard remarked with a sigh. "There's still time," Jennifer said softly. "Not for us as a couple, but to fulfill the individual dreams we left behind." The rideshare car turned the corner, approaching. "Good night, Richard," she said, extending her hand formally. He took her hand, but instead of shaking it, brought it to his lips in a respectful gesture. "Good night, Jennifer. I'll wait for your answer when you're ready." On the way home, Jennifer watched the city lights through the car window, reflecting on the complexity of emotions the meeting had stirred: anger, hurt, nostalgia, and now, surprisingly, a touch of hope. Not for reconciliation, but for the possibility of a healthier relationship, even if only professional. When she entered the apartment, she noticed something different. On the coffee table in the living room was a folder that hadn't been there when she left. She approached cautiously and recognized the Wilson Construction logo. Inside were blueprints, sketches, and an explanatory memo about the Cultural Center project in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. A handwritten note accompanied the materials. "Regardless of your decision, I wanted you to see what we're planning. Your insights would be valuable, even as an outside consultant. ER." Jennifer spread the materials across the table, absorbing the details of the ambitious project. It was exactly the kind of work she dreamed of doing in her youth: architecture, with social purpose, urban revitalization, historic preservation. She sat on the couch flipping through the pages with growing interest. She picked up a pencil and almost unconsciously began jotting notes in the margins, suggestions for changes, questions about materials and techniques. When she finally glanced at the clock, it was nearly 2 in the morning. She'd spent hours, completely absorbed in the project's details, feeling a professional excitement she hadn't experienced in years. With a sigh, she gathered the documents and placed them back in the folder. She needed sleep to clear her mind. The decision she would make in the coming days would not only affect her professional future, but also the nature of the post-divorce relationship she would maintain with Richard. The next morning, Jennifer woke to the sound of the doorbell. Still drowsy, she threw on a robe and went to answer. To her surprise, she found Mrs. Elaine Wilson at the door, as elegant as ever in a sky-blue ensemble. "Sorry to show up so early, dear," the older woman said in her usual straightforward tone, "but I thought we needed to talk privately." Jennifer hesitated only a moment before inviting her former mother-in-law, was it even correct to call her that when the divorce wasn't finalized, inside? "I just made coffee," she offered, guiding Mrs. Wilson to the living room. "Would you like a cup?" "I'd love one," the woman replied, sitting with the impeccable posture she maintained even at 75. "This apartment always had such a wonderful coffee aroma in the mornings. I'll miss my visits here." The simple observation reminded Jennifer that the divorce wouldn't just impact her and Richard. It would ripple through an entire network of relationships built over 2 decades. After serving the coffee in porcelain cups, a wedding gift from Mrs. Wilson herself, Jennifer sat across from her, waiting for the reason behind the early visit. "I assume you and Richard spoke last night," Mrs. Wilson began, cutting straight to the point as was her way. "Yes, we had dinner together." "And did he explain about the Brooklyn Navy Yard project, the position at the construction company?" "He did," Jennifer confirmed, curious about her former mother-in-law's interest in the matter. "But I haven't made a decision yet." Mrs. Wilson took a sip of coffee before continuing. "Had you already been thinking about returning to architecture before all of this happened?" The question caught Jennifer off guard. "Actually, yes. Over the past few months, I've missed my profession more and more," she admitted. "But I never seriously discussed it with Richard, because he never made space for that kind of conversation," Mrs. Wilson finished, with a frankness bordering on bluntness. "Just like his father, the Wilson men have a terrible habit of assuming. They know what's best for everyone around them, especially the women in their lives." Jennifer couldn't help but smile at the accuracy of the remark. "You seem very familiar with the pattern. I spent 42 years by Edward Wilson's side, dear. I know exactly how they operate." Mrs. Wilson softened her tone. "But I also know that behind the arrogance and chronic workaholism, there are men who genuinely want to do right. They just don't know how." "And you came here to defend Richard?" Jennifer asked, not with hostility but curiosity. "No," the reply was clear and direct. "I came to offer you a perspective you might not have considered." Mrs. Wilson set down her cup and leaned slightly forward. "When Edward passed away 10 years ago, I was 65 and had never made a significant decision about the family business, despite being a nominal partner throughout our marriage," she explained. "Suddenly, I found myself the majority shareholder of a company I barely understood." Jennifer nodded, recalling the turbulent period after her father-in-law's death. Richard had taken over as president of the construction company, while Michael handled the legal side. Mrs. Wilson, as far as she knew, had stayed out of day-to-day operations. "What few people realize is that for the last 5 years I've been actively involved in the board of directors through a discreet arrangement with Michael," the older woman continued. "I learned the business, started weighing in on strategic decisions, and you know what I discovered?" "What?" "That I have a talent for it," Mrs. Wilson replied, a glint of pride in her eyes. "My decades as just the builder's wife gave me a unique perspective on the market, on client relationships, on the kind of projects that truly make a difference." Jennifer was starting to see where this conversation was heading. "You're suggesting I could have a similar experience?" "I'm suggesting you have an opportunity I only got at 65, Mrs. Elaine clarified. "To turn the knowledge you've gained over these years, even indirectly, into a position of real power and influence, to prove your worth not just to Richard, but to yourself and to the market. It was a perspective Jennifer hadn't considered. She'd always seen Richard's offer as an attempt at compensation, or, as Rebecca had suggested, a way to keep her in his orbit. She hadn't thought about the strategic advantages of taking a role in a company she already knew from the inside, using connections and knowledge built over years. "Is the Brooklyn Navy Yard project important to you?" Jennifer asked, sensing there was more to this story. Mrs. Elaine smiled, seemingly pleased with her former daughter-in-law's perceptiveness. "It's the most important project Wilson Construction has ever taken on, and likely the last large-scale one, where I'll have any influence before retiring completely," she admitted. "Revitalizing that area was a dream Edward and I shared when we were young, before greed and ambition turned him into the man he became." The revelation added a new layer to the situation. This wasn't just Richard trying to make up for past mistakes or a smart business move. There was an emotional component, a family legacy at stake. "Why me?" Jennifer asked bluntly. "There are dozens of talented architects out there with recent active experience. Because you understand not just architecture, but us, the Wilson family," Mrs. Elaine replied simply. "You know our strengths and weaknesses. And most of all, because your ideas about sustainability and social responsibility are exactly what the company needs to reinvent itself in today's market." Jennifer weighed her former mother-in-law's words, recognizing the sincerity behind them. Mrs. Elaine had always been blunt to the point of rudeness, but never dishonest. "I'll think it over carefully," Jennifer promised. "That's all I ask." Mrs. Elaine stood, signaling the visit was coming to an end. "Whatever you decide about the position, I hope you know you'll always have a place in our family, Jennifer. Some bonds go beyond legal papers." Before leaving, Mrs. Elaine made one final remark. "Richard and Michael don't know I came to see you, and I'd prefer to keep it that way." Jennifer nodded, understanding her former mother-in-law's wish for secrecy. It was a gesture of female solidarity in a family dominated by ambitious men. After Mrs. Elaine left, Jennifer remained seated for a long time, turning over the new information. What had seemed like a straightforward decision was growing increasingly complex, with layers of personal, professional, and family relationships intertwined in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her phone rang, Rebecca's name flashing on the screen. "So?" her friend asked as soon as Jennifer answered. "How was dinner with the almost ex?" "Surprisingly civil," Jennifer replied. "And confusing." "Confusing how?" "Like when you think you finally closed a chapter of your life, only to realize maybe another one's beginning, connected to the first in ways you never expected." "That sounds dangerously like reconsideration," Rebecca noted, concern evident in her voice. "You're not thinking of going back to him, are you?" "No, the marriage is definitely over," Jennifer assured her. "But there might be room for professional collaboration." She briefly explained the project for the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the offer from Wilson Construction, the alternative from Robert Stevens, and the recent visit from Mrs. Elaine. "Wow, the matriarch herself came to court you." Rebecca seemed impressed. "This is serious then, apparently. But the question remains, can I really work with Richard after everything that happened?" "The question isn't whether you can, but whether you want to," Rebecca corrected, "and only you can answer that." Her friend's observation was spot on. For years, Jennifer had subordinated her desires to the needs of the family, the marriage, the social image they cultivated. Now, for the first time in a long while, the decision was entirely hers. "I need to think clearly," Jennifer said, more to herself than to her friend. "Without letting old emotions or future fears dictate the choice. Why not do what you always did when you needed to organize your thoughts?" Rebecca suggested. "A project, on paper, like in the old days." The suggestion struck Jennifer like a revelation. During school and in her early years after graduating, she always turned to paper and pencil to clear her mind. She'd sketch, doodle, design, and in the process her ideas would naturally fall into place. "Rebecca, you're a genius," she declared, suddenly energized. "That's exactly what I'll do." After hanging up, Jennifer went to her small office. She pulled out large sheets of special architectural drawing paper, pencils, rulers, and other materials she hadn't used in years. Spreading everything out on the desk, she got to work. First, she reviewed the documents Richard had left her. Then she consulted the notes she'd taken during lunch with Robert Stevens. Finally, she let her own ideas flow freely, sketching alternative concepts for the cultural center, thinking not just about physical structures, but how the space could transform people's relationship with that historic part of the city. Hours passed without her noticing. When she finally stepped back from the desk, the sun was already setting. She'd produced dozens of pages of sketches, notes, and preliminary calculations. Her fingers were smudged with graphite, and she felt a slight ache in her back from hunching over. Familiar and oddly comforting sensations, reminiscent of her most productive days as an architect. More importantly, she'd reached a clarity that had eluded her before. She picked up her phone and, after a moment's hesitation, sent Richard a message. "I've made my decision. Can we meet tomorrow at the construction company? Is 10 a.m. "Good for you." The reply came almost instantly. "I'll be waiting. Main conference room." The brevity of his response suggested he was respecting her space, avoiding pressure. It was a small gesture, but meaningful. Jennifer organized her sketches and notes into a sleek folder. Regardless of the path she chose, she'd rediscovered something crucial in those last few hours. Her passion for architecture remained intact, just dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken again. That night, she slept better than she had in weeks. The uncertainty that had plagued her since filing the divorce papers had been replaced by a quiet determination. She didn't know exactly how the future would unfold, but for the first time in years, she felt in control of her own path. The next morning, Jennifer dressed carefully for the meeting. She chose a fuchsia pantsuit, a color Richard had once remarked suited her auburn hair perfectly. The choice was deliberate. She wanted to be seen not as the soon-to-be ex-wife, but as the confident professional she was rediscovering. When she arrived at the construction company's headquarters, she was met with a level of respect she hadn't experienced in a long time. Employees who once treated her with the deference reserved for the boss's wife now greeted her with barely concealed professional curiosity. News about her possible addition to the executive team had apparently already spread. Richard was waiting for her in the conference room, accompanied by Michael and, to Jennifer's surprise, Robert Stevens. The large windows offered a panoramic view of downtown Manhattan, with New York Harbor in the background, the perfect setting for the decision she was about to announce. "Good morning," she greeted them, keeping her tone professional as she entered the room. The three men stood and Richard gestured to the chair at his right, a prominent seat usually reserved for important partners or high-ranking clients. "Thank you for coming," Jennifer continued once everyone had settled back in. "I imagine you're all curious about my decision." "We're eager to hear it," Michael confirmed, ever formal. Jennifer opened her folder, revealing the sketches and notes she had prepared the day before. "I've spent the last 24 hours deeply reflecting on the Brooklyn Navy Yard project," she began. "It's a fascinating initiative, with the potential to transform not just a neglected urban space, but the city's very relationship with its maritime history." As she spoke, she spread her drawings across the table. Robert Stevens leaned forward, clearly intrigued by the proposal she was presenting. "These are just preliminary ideas," she clarified, "but I believe they offer an approach that balances historic preservation, modern functionality, and community engagement." For nearly 20 minutes, Jennifer outlined her vision for the cultural center, answering Robert's technical questions and Michael's financial concerns with a confidence that surprised even herself. Richard remained relatively quiet, watching her with an expression that mixed pride and a hint of melancholy. When she finished her presentation, there was a moment of appreciative silence. "Impressive," Robert finally said, "especially considering you produced all this in a single day. Which brings us to the reason for this meeting," Jennifer concluded, gathering her materials. "My decision regarding the proposal you made." Everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath for a moment. "After carefully considering all options, I've decided," she paused deliberately, "that I won't be accepting the position of project director at Wilson Construction." Richard's face flashed through a rapid succession of emotions: surprise, disappointment, and finally, restrained resignation. Michael frowned, clearly not expecting this answer. "I understand," Richard said, regaining his composure. "We respect your decision, of course. However," Jennifer continued, "I'd like to propose an alternative." This statement recaptured everyone's attention. "Robert has offered me a consulting position at his firm, specifically for this project," she explained. "I'd like to accept this offer, with one additional condition: that we establish a formal partnership between Stevens Architecture and Wilson Construction for this and potentially other future projects." The proposal took everyone by surprise. Robert was the first to react. "A joint venture between our firms?" he asked, clearly intrigued by the idea. "Exactly," Jennifer confirmed. "We'd combine the design and sustainability excellence of your firm with the executive experience and financial strength of the construction company, and I'd serve as the bridge between the teams, ensuring the architectural vision is preserved during implementation." Michael, always attentive to legal and financial details, leaned forward. "Interesting. We'd need to draft a specific contract, outlining responsibilities and profit sharing, but conceptually it makes sense." "More than that," added Robert, growing increasingly excited. "This could mark the beginning of a new approach to large-scale projects in the city, a collaboration that equally values architectural vision and practical execution." Throughout the discussion, Richard had remained silent, studying Jennifer with a thoughtful expression. Finally, he spoke. "It's an elegant proposal," he acknowledged. "It allows you to resume your career independently from the construction company while still leveraging your connection with us. A solution that benefits everyone." "That was the goal," Jennifer confirmed, holding his gaze. "A professional separation that doesn't waste 2 decades of shared history." The unspoken parallel to their personal situation wasn't lost on anyone in the room. "I think we have the outline of a promising agreement," declared Michael, ever the pragmatist. "Shall I have the legal team start drafting the terms?" "Please," Jennifer agreed. "I'd like to review the contract before signing, naturally." "Of course," Michael assured her. "I'll arrange a formal meeting with you and Mr. Stevens once we have a first draft." As Michael took notes and Robert reviewed Jennifer's sketches, with renewed interest, Richard discreetly approached her. "This wasn't what I expected," he admitted quietly, "but it's a smart solution. Congratulations." "Thank you," she replied with a small smile. "I think we needed to find a new balance, personally and professionally." He nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her words. "When you handed me those divorce papers, I thought I was losing everything," Richard confessed. "Only now do I realize that maybe we're just reconfiguring what we have, not necessarily losing it." It was an unexpectedly insightful remark from him, a man who rarely displayed such self-reflection. 23 years can't be erased. "By a legal document," Jennifer agreed. "For better or worse, our lives are intertwined. We need to find a healthy way to honor that history, even as we move forward separately." The meeting continued for another hour, with technical and legal details being discussed. When it finally adjourned, everyone left with a renewed sense of purpose. Robert invited Jennifer to visit his office the following afternoon to introduce her to the team working on the project. In the building's lobby, as she prepared to leave, Jennifer felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning, she found Richard. "Can we talk for a moment? Alone?" he asked. She hesitated briefly before agreeing. "Of course." They walked together to a small interior garden on the ground floor, a quiet space rarely frequented by employees at that time of day. "I wanted to thank you," Richard said once they found a secluded bench among ornamental palms. "You could have simply refused our offer and walked away. That would have been your right, but you chose a solution that benefits everyone." "I didn't do it out of altruism," Jennifer clarified. "It's a decision that benefits me professionally too." "I know, and that makes it even more admirable." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I always knew you were talented, Jennifer, but I don't think I ever fully understood how much our dynamic stifled that talent." The admission seemed genuinely painful for him. "It was my choice, too," she acknowledged generously. I could have fought harder, insisted on my career, but I let the marriage, your career, our social obligations take precedence. And now? He asked, his gaze suggesting the question went beyond the professional. Now we move forward, replied Jennifer with quiet certainty, building something new from the ashes of what we had. Richard nodded slowly, accepting the answer for all it implied. The divorce papers, he said after a moment. I've already signed them and sent them to my lawyer. He'll contact Mr. David to finalize everything. Thank you for not making things complicated. Like you said yesterday, some bridges once. Burned can't be rebuilt, he quoted her words. Our marriage is one of them, but maybe we can build something different in its place. Not a bridge, but perhaps a walkway. Something that allows for an occasional crossing when needed. The architectural metaphor drew a genuine smile from Jennifer. I've always loved how you turn everything into a construction analogy. Occupational hazard, he joked, momentarily easing the tension. They fell silent for a few moments, both gazing at the small reflecting pool in the center of the courtyard garden. You know what's funny? Jennifer finally said. For years, I dreaded this moment. The end of the marriage, the uncertainty of what would come next. And now that it's happening, I feel more clarity than fear. Maybe because deep down we both knew it would come to this, Richard suggested. We were just delaying the inevitable, living in a compromised structure that could collapse at any moment. Another construction analogy, she observed with a half smile. Sorry, it's a reflex. Richard's phone rang, interrupting the moment. He glanced at the screen apologetically. I have a video conference in 5 minutes, he said, visibly annoyed by the interruption. Investors for the project. Go ahead, Jennifer encouraged, standing up. I have plenty to organize myself. For a moment, they stood facing each other, suspended in that strange limbo between what they had been and what they would become from now on. Richard extended his hand formally, but then, on impulse, leaned in and gently kissed Jennifer's cheek. See you soon, then, he murmured. As project partners. See you soon, she replied, allowing herself a small smile. As she watched Richard walk toward the elevators, Jennifer felt a strange mix of emotions. The end of a marriage, the start of a new professional chapter. Grief and rebirth, intertwined in ways she couldn't easily explain. On her way home, she decided to take a detour. She drove to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the area that would be transformed by the project she was now part of. She parked near the old Warehouse 5, a historic brick building that would become the heart of the future cultural center. The place was nearly deserted, save for a few dock workers in the distance and a small makeshift cafe serving the occasional passerby. Walking slowly among the historic warehouses, Jennifer absorbed the atmosphere. The salty breeze mingled with the scent of roasted coffee, the distant sound of boats, the golden afternoon light reflecting on the waters of New York Harbor. This was the setting for her professional rebirth, a space full of history and potential, waiting only for the chance to be transformed, not unlike herself, she realized with a smile. She decided to step into the small cafe, a simple place with worn wooden tables and decor that mixed nautical elements with old photographs of the harbor. A black woman with graying hair, looking to be in her 70s, was serving coffee behind the counter. Good afternoon, Jennifer greeted, sitting on a stool by the counter. An espresso, please. Of course, dear, the woman replied with a warm smile. We don't often see well-dressed folks around here. Are you here for work? Jennifer returned the smile, immediately feeling at ease with the woman's frankness. More or less. I'm an architect, working on a project for this area. The woman raised her eyebrows as she prepared coffee in the old Italian machine. Ugh, another one of those revitalization projects? She asked, making air quotes with her fingers. I've seen plenty of those come and go in my 30 years serving coffee here. There was a hint of skepticism in her voice that Jennifer couldn't ignore. May I ask your name? Jennifer inquired, genuinely interested. Mrs. Sheila, the woman replied, placing the cup of coffee in front of her. My husband Harold was a dock worker here at the port. After he retired, we opened this cafe. He passed 10 years ago, but I kept the business going. It's a pleasure, Mrs. Sheila. I'm Jennifer. She took a sip of the coffee, surprised by its quality. Wow, this coffee is excellent. Family secret. Mrs. Sheila smiled proudly. So tell me about this project. Are they tearing everything down to build luxury condos? The direct question caught Jennifer off guard, but she saw an opportunity in it. Actually, no, the project we're developing aims to preserve historic structures like this warehouse, she explained, pointing to the neighboring building. The idea is to transform the area into a cultural center that celebrates New York's harbor history, offering spaces for local artists, education, memory. As she spoke, Jennifer realized she was voicing some of the ideas she'd sketched out the day before. Mrs. Sheila listened attentively, her initial skepticism giving way to cautious curiosity. "Sounds nice on paper," the woman remarked when Jennifer finished. "But what about people like me, folks who've lived and worked here for decades? Every time these grand projects come along, the little guys get pushed out." The concern was valid and struck Jennifer deeply. It was exactly the kind of issue her thesis addressed: how to ensure urban revitalization projects also benefited the existing community rather than just gentrifying it. "That's a fair concern, Mrs. Sheila," Jennifer acknowledged thoughtfully. "In fact, I'd love to hear more about your experience here, about this place's history from the perspective of someone who's actually lived it, not just studied it in books." Mrs. Sheila's eyes lit up at the chance to share her memories. "Honey, if I start telling stories, you'll be here all night," the woman laughed. "This harbor has tales no books ever recorded." For the next hour, Jennifer listened, fascinated. As Mrs. Sheila recounted episodes of life at the port, the massive ships arriving laden with goods, the impromptu parties when foreign vessels docked, the changes modernization brought, the eccentric characters who were part of the local scene. "You know what I miss most?" Mrs. Sheila asked at one point. "The Sunday samba circles right over in that square. The dock workers brought their instruments, families gathered. There was food, music, laughter. That got lost over time." The mention of samba sparked an idea in Jennifer's mind. "What if we could bring that back?" she asked excitedly. "A space dedicated to the cultural roots born here, with regular performances, workshops for young people to learn." "That'd be a dream," Mrs. Sheila sighed. "But dreams cost money, and money usually comes with strings." "Not always," Jennifer countered. "Sometimes all it takes is someone willing to listen before designing." When she finally said goodbye to Mrs. Sheila, Jennifer felt invigorated. That casual conversation had shifted her perspective on the project. It wasn't just about reviving her career or creating something visually impressive. It was a chance to truly impact lives, to honor the living history of a place. On her way home, she called Robert Stevens. "Robert, it's Jennifer. I just had an idea for the Brooklyn Navy Yard project and would like to discuss it with you tomorrow if possible." "Of course, I'm curious now," replied the architect. "Can you give me a hint?" "Community consultation," explained Jennifer. "Before finalizing any concept, we need to hear from those who truly know and live in that area." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, followed by an appreciative laugh. "Jennifer Taylor, I don't think Wilson Construction realizes the revolution they're about to experience with you on board." Hanging up, Jennifer smiled to herself. Maybe it really was a revolution, not just in the project, but in her own life. The woman who had lived in her husband's shadow for years was finally finding her own light. When she arrived at the apartment, she found a formal envelope under her door. Inside, the divorce papers, already signed by Richard, waiting, only for her signature to be filed with the court. She sat on the couch, the envelope in her lap, her thoughts returning to the conversation in the construction company's garden. "Not a bridge, but a walkway," Richard had said. The metaphor was fitting. The marriage was definitely over, but something new was rising from the ashes. Not a romantic relationship, but a partnership based on mutual respect and recognition of each other's talents. With a determined sigh, she signed the documents and placed them in a folder to send to her lawyer the next morning. She was officially turning the page. 2 days later, Jennifer led her first formal meeting at Robert Stevens's office. At the table, besides Robert himself, were 2 young architects from his team, Michael representing the construction company, and a surprise, Mrs. Sheila, accompanied by 2 other long-time residents of the Navy Yard area, a former dock worker named Nathan, and a local artisan, Irene. Before we present our preliminary concepts, Jennifer began, confident in her role as mediator between the different interests involved, I thought it was essential to bring in the voices of the people who truly know the soul of that place. Mrs. Sheila, Nathan, and Irene kindly agreed to share their experiences and expectations. Michael initially seemed uncomfortable with the presence of the local residents, but as they shared their stories and perspectives, even he began taking interested notes. Mrs. Sheila spoke about the importance of preserving accessible spaces for the community. Nathan offered valuable insights about the area's logistics and how the project could improve circulation without losing its character. Irene, with her experience as an artisan, gave practical suggestions on integrating exhibition spaces that would truly serve local artists. What worries me most is that these projects come with everything already set on paper, Nathan said at one point, and we, who were born and raised there, are treated as obstacles to be removed, not as people who can contribute. Robert nodded, acknowledging the validity of the criticism. That's exactly why Jennifer's approach is so important, he replied. And I admit it's a lesson for me too. After so many years in this field, we sometimes fall into the trap of thinking our technical knowledge is enough. The meeting stretched on for 2 more hours, resulting in several significant adjustments to the original concept. When it finally ended, Jennifer walked the 3 guests to the elevator. "Thank you so much for coming," she said, shaking each of their hands. "Your contributions were incredibly valuable." Mrs. Sheila held her hand a little longer. "You're different, my dear," the older woman observed with a warm smile. "You have the eyes of someone who truly sees, not just looks." The "I" comment touched Jennifer deeply. For years she had felt invisible, both in her marriage and professionally. Now she was not only being seen, but seeing others, truly seeing, with empathy and purpose. Back in the meeting room, she found Robert and Michael enthusiastically discussing new directions for the project. "Jennifer, that was brilliant," praised Robert. "The idea of transforming the old warehouse into an interactive space showcasing the history of dockwork, with first-hand accounts from the workers themselves. We wouldn't have arrived at this without their perspective." Michael, ever the pragmatist, added, "It'll require some budget adjustments, but the gain in community reception and cultural potential more than makes up for it. Richard will be impressed." The mention of her almost ex-husband's name no longer brought the discomfort it once had. He was just another collaborator on the project, someone she'd maintain a cordial professional relationship with. "Speaking of Richard," Michael continued, checking his phone, "he just got back from Chicago and asked if we could have an update meeting at 5 p.m. Are you both available?" Robert confirmed he was, and Jennifer, after checking her newly established professional schedule, agreed as well. They'd have a few hours to organize their new ideas before presenting them. "I'll notify the legal team to expedite the formalization of our partnership," Michael added. "With the project taking this new direction, we need to ensure all legal aspects are covered." When Michael stepped out to make some calls, Robert turned to Jennifer with an admiring smile. "You know, when Richard suggested your name for this project, I'll admit I had reservations," the veteran architect confessed. "Not about your capability, I've always admired that, but about the personal dynamics involved. Divorce, work, I thought it might be a recipe for disaster." "And now," Jennifer asked, curious. "Now I see I underestimated both of you," Robert replied sincerely. "The maturity you're showing in handling this situation is admirable, and your talent was only dormant, not lost." The comment warmed Jennifer's heart. After so many years away from the professional world, recognition from someone of Robert Stevens' caliber meant a great deal. At exactly 5 p.m., the expanded team gathered in the conference room at Wilson Construction. Richard, freshly returned from Chicago, looked tired but alert. He greeted everyone professionally, giving Jennifer the same courteous treatment he extended to the others. The presentation of the new ideas, led jointly by Jennifer and Robert, flowed with contagious enthusiasm. As they explained the modifications inspired by community input, Richard's interest visibly grew. "This participatory approach is unexpected," he remarked when they finished. but extremely valuable. It shifts the project from something we impose on the community to something we build with them. Exactly, Jennifer agreed. Pleased he had grasped the essence of the proposal. And it has the added benefit of creating local advocates for the project, minimizing future resistance. Richard nodded, clearly impressed by the strategic angle. This will change our bidding and approval. Timeline, he noted, ever attentive to practicalities. But I agree the end result fully justifies the adjustment. The meeting continued with technical discussions about budget, materials, and deadlines. Jennifer participated actively, offering insights that blended her architectural training with the social sensitivity she had developed over the years. It was as if the different parts of her life, the brilliant student, the business executive's wife who navigated social events with ease, the woman who had recently rediscovered her independence, were now merging into one complete, confident professional. By the time the meeting ended, it was already past 7 p.m. The group began to disperse, promising to continue discussions in the coming days. Richard waited until most had left before approaching Jennifer, who was organizing her notes. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Of course," she replied, finishing what she was doing. When they were alone in the room, Richard seemed slightly hesitant, a rare sight for a man usually so self-assured. "I wanted to tell you, I'm impressed," he began. "Not just with the ideas for the project, which are excellent, but with your ability to lead, to bring together different perspectives, to truly listen." "Thank you," Jennifer answered, genuinely touched by the acknowledgement. "It's ironic, isn't it?" he continued with a melancholic smile. "I spent years undervaluing those same qualities in our marriage, and now I see them as invaluable professional assets." The observation was sharp and painfully honest. "People change, Richard," she offered without bitterness. "We're both evolving. Maybe we needed this realignment in our lives to truly see each other clearly." He nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. David informed me you signed the divorce papers," he mentioned, slightly shifting the subject. "The judge should finalize everything in a few weeks." "Yes," Jennifer confirmed. "A necessary step." "I agree," Richard said, then hesitated briefly before adding, "I received an invitation to your sister's birthday next month. Emily made sure to include me, even with our current situation. So I was wondering if it would be appropriate for me to attend." The question caught Jennifer by surprise. She hadn't considered how they would handle shared social events after the divorce. Emily and Richard had always had a cordial relationship, and her sister clearly wanted to maintain family ties, regardless of the end of their marriage. "I think it would be fine," she replied after a moment of reflection. "We're mature enough to share those social spaces without discomfort, aren't we? Besides, Emily would be happy." "Are you sure?" he pressed. "I don't want to create any awkward situations." "I'm sure," Jennifer affirmed, surprising herself with her own calmness. "In fact, this is part of what we talked about earlier, not a bridge, but a walkway. The occasions like this are crossings we can make, as long as there's mutual respect." Richard smiled at the reference to the metaphor he himself had created. "In that case, I'll see you there," he concluded. "And in the meantime, we have an exciting project to develop." "Yes, we do," Jennifer agreed, tucking her last notes into her folder. "Speaking of which, tomorrow I'm revisiting the Brooklyn Navy Yard. I thought I'd map out more of the spaces the residents mentioned as meaningful to the community." "Good idea," Richard approved. "Would you like company? It's been a while since I've visited in person, and it would be useful to get an updated perspective." The offer was professional and appropriate, yet Jennifer hesitated for a moment. Were they ready for that kind? To have a close interaction so soon after the separation? Why not, she finally decided. 2 pairs of eyes see better than one. Meet you there at 10? We could grab coffee at Mrs. Sheila's place. Deal, Richard agreed, pleased. You surprise me, Jennifer. Your ability to adapt, to move forward without resentment, it's admirable. Don't confuse adaptation with an absence of pain, she gently corrected. I'm moving forward because it's the only path possible. Looking only backward keeps us stagnant. The following months were a time of intense transformation for Jennifer. The Brooklyn Navy Yard project was progressing by leaps and bounds. gaining recognition not just in New York City, but in specialized architecture publications across the country. The participatory approach she had implemented became a case study on how to integrate local communities into large-scale urban revitalization projects. Her routine was now filled with creative meetings, site visits, and presentations to investors. The partnership with Robert Stevens's firm had flourished beyond initial expectations, opening doors to other collaborative projects. Jennifer finally felt she had found her professional place, not in Richard's shadow, but as a professional respected on her own merit. The divorce was finalized without complications, as promised. The division of assets was fair, and Jennifer chose to keep the apartment in the Upper East Side, now redecorated to her own taste. The shares in the construction company she received as part of the settlement ensured her financial stability, allowing her to focus entirely on her professional reinvention. Her relationship with Richard had evolved into something she never imagined possible, a respectful friendship based on mutual admiration. They worked together on the Brooklyn Navy Yard project, each in their specific roles, finding a professional balance they had never achieved as a couple. The wounds of the past, though not completely forgotten, had healed enough to allow this new dynamic. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, 6 months after the night of the birthday cake that had changed their lives, Jennifer was overseeing the final details for the partial opening of the Cultural Center. The old Warehouse 5, now meticulously restored, would open its doors the following week for an inaugural exhibition on the history of New York Harbor. As she checked the lighting in the exhibition area, she noticed Mrs. Sheila entering the space, looking around in awe. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined," the older woman remarked, walking closer. "When you showed me those colorful sketches, I thought, it looks nice on paper, but let's see it in real life. And look at this, it turned out even better." Jennifer smiled, genuinely moved by the approval. "A lot of this was inspired by your stories, Mrs. Sheila. We tried to capture the soul of the place you described." The elderly woman walked over to a panel where old photographs of the harbor were displayed. Among them was a sepia-toned image of dock workers gathered around samba instruments, exactly as she had described in her first conversation with Jennifer. "Where did you find this photo?" Mrs. Sheila asked, gently touching the glass protecting the image. "In the city archives," Jennifer explained. "We spent months researching, digitizing, and restoring images. We wanted people to truly see the history that lived here." The older woman's eyes filled with tears as she recognized a familiar face in the photograph. "This one," she pointed to a smiling young man holding a tambourine. "That's my Harold, in his early 20s. I'd never seen this photo before." The moment of genuine emotion confirmed for Jennifer that they were on the right path. The project wasn't just about architecture or urban renewal, it was about connecting people, preserving memories, honoring stories. "I have a surprise for you," Jennifer said, guiding Mrs. Sheila to an area still covered by a cloth. "Actually, for all of you in the community." With a gesture, she removed the fabric, revealing an elegant plaque at the entrance to a spacious area. "Harbor Cafe, since 1973, Mrs. Sheila and Harold." The space was an expanded, modernized recreation of the small cafe Mrs. Sheila had once run between the warehouses. It kept the welcoming atmosphere of the original, but with completely new facilities. "What?" the woman stammered, confused. "What is this?" "Your new space," Jennifer explained, "or rather the expansion of the old one. We want the cafe to remain the heart of this area, run by you and your family if you accept. It'll be the meeting point of the cultural center, keeping the tradition alive." Mrs. Sheila was momentarily speechless, her gaze shifting between the elegant space and Jennifer. "But how? Why? I thought we'd have to leave when the renovation started." "That was never the plan," Jennifer assured her. "At least not since I learned about your story. You're a fundamental part of this place, Mrs. Sheila. The cafe wouldn't be the same without you." The woman finally let her tears flow freely, hugging Jennifer with surprising strength for someone her age. "Thank you, my dear. Harold would be so proud to see this." The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Richard appeared accompanied by Robert Stevens and some representatives from the city. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, noticing the emotion in the air. "But the representatives from the Department of Cultural Affairs are here for the final inspection before the opening." "We're on our way," Jennifer replied, still holding Mrs. Sheila. "We were just having a special moment here." Richard watched the scene with an understanding smile. "I see you revealed the surprise early," he remarked. "It was supposed to be at the official opening." "Some revelations can't wait," Jennifer answered. As Mrs. Sheila composed herself, moved, Richard stepped forward to greet her. "I promise your cafe will be just as it always was, Mrs. Sheila, only now with a much larger audience to appreciate your special coffee." The elderly woman smiled, wiping her tears. "You two make a good team," she observed, looking from Richard to Jennifer. "It's rare to see people in power truly caring about folks like us." The innocent, genuine comment created a brief moment of discomfort between the former spouses. It was the first time someone outside their close circle had seen them as a team since the divorce. "I'll leave you with your important guests," Mrs. Sheila said, noticing more people had arrived. "I need to tell my daughter and grandson about this. They won't believe it." As she walked away, Richard and Jennifer found themselves momentarily alone before joining the waiting group. "She's right, you know," Richard said quietly. "We do make a good team. Professionally, I mean." "Yes, we do," Jennifer agreed. "Maybe we needed this adjustment in our relationship to find the right balance." He nodded thoughtfully. "Are you going to the opening cocktail with anyone?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The question caught Jennifer off guard. In the months since the separation, they'd both kept their personal lives discreetly separate from their professional interaction. "Actually, yes," she replied after a moment. "I invited Peter Harrison, that history professor, who helped us with the harbor research. It seemed appropriate, considering his contribution to the project." "Of course," Richard nodded, his face a mask of professional neutrality. "That makes perfect sense." Something in Richard's restrained reaction made Jennifer wonder if there was more to that question than simple, polite curiosity. But before she could reflect further, they were called to greet the official visitors. The week of the opening was a whirlwind of activity. Journalists, photographers, city officials, everyone wanted to see the innovative project that had transformed a neglected area into a vibrant cultural center. The community-focused approach implemented by Jennifer received special praise, with several publications highlighting how the project had managed to revitalize the space without displacing its original inhabitants. On the evening of the official opening ceremony, the old warehouse was unrecognizable. Carefully positioned lights accentuated the historic architectural elements, while contemporary installations created a harmonious dialogue between past and present. A local orchestra played compositions inspired by the harbor's history, and Mrs. Sheila's cafe, now operating in its new space, served drinks and snacks to the guests. Jennifer arrived accompanied by Peter Harrison, a charismatic middle-aged historian with whom she had developed a close friendship during the historical research for the project. She wore a long emerald green dress that complemented her auburn hair, now loose in natural waves, a deliberate choice symbolizing her newfound freedom. As she entered the main space, she was immediately surrounded by people offering congratulations. Architecture critics, professional colleagues, city representatives, everyone wanted a few minutes with the architect who had helped conceive this remarkable space. From a distance, Richard watched her interact with ease, accepting praise gracefully and redirecting credit to the team and the local community. Dressed in an impeccable dark suit, he seemed both part of the celebration and slightly removed from it. Robert Stevens approached him, 2 champagne glasses in hand. "A triumphant evening, isn't it?" remarked the seasoned architect, offering one of the glasses to Richard. "Without a doubt," Richard agreed, accepting the drink. "The final result exceeded all expectations." "I wasn't just talking about the project," Robert clarified with a knowing smile. "I meant Jennifer. Seeing her like this, shining on her own merit after everything she's been through, it's extraordinary." Richard observed his ex-wife across the room. She was laughing at something her companion had said, her eyes sparkling with a liveliness he hadn't seen in years. "She always had that potential," he replied, a mix of pride and melancholy in his voice. "She just needed the right space to flourish." "Space you finally gave her, even if late," Robert noted bluntly. "It was a noble gesture, Richard." "It wasn't nobility," he corrected. "It was overdue recognition of a mistake, and maybe an attempt at making amends." Before Robert could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Michael, accompanied by the city's mayor. "Ah, there you are," Michael exclaimed. "The mayor would like to take a few photos with the key figures behind the project. Shall we gather the team?" Richard nodded, setting his nearly untouched glass on a nearby table. As they made their way to the center of the room, where Jennifer was already positioned for photos, he felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride in the project's success, professional satisfaction at the recognition, but also an indefinable sense of loss seeing Jennifer so fulfilled and radiant without him as her life partner. The official photos were taken, speeches were given. The mayor emphasized the project's importance for the revitalization of the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Robert spoke about preserving historical heritage, and Michael highlighted the construction company's commitment to socially impactful projects. When it was Jennifer's turn to speak, she surprised everyone by inviting Mrs. Sheila to join her on the small stage. "This project wouldn't be what it is without the stories and wisdom of people like Mrs. Sheila," Jennifer declared into the microphone. "Architects and builders create structures, but it's the people who turn them into places with soul and meaning." Her simple, heartfelt speech deeply moved those in attendance. At the end of the official ceremony, Jennifer found herself once again surrounded by admirers and potential clients interested in her unique approach. Peter Harrison, her companion, graciously gave her space for these professional connections, circulating through the venue and admiring the carefully preserved historical details. At one point, Jennifer saw him engaged in an animated conversation with Richard about New York City's harbor history, the two men seeming genuinely comfortable with each other, without the tension that might have existed given the situation. It was well past midnight when the crowd began to thin. The formal guests had left, leaving only the core project team and a few close friends. The DJ, who had replaced the orchestra, was playing more relaxed music, and the atmosphere had shifted into something more intimate. Jennifer, barefoot after hours in high heels, was sitting on one of the wooden benches near the large window overlooking the harbor. Peter had said goodbye moments earlier, with a respectful kiss on her cheek and a promise to meet for coffee the following week. "May I join you?" Richard's voice interrupted her thoughts. She nodded, gesturing to the empty space beside her. He sat down, keeping a respectful distance. "So," he began, gazing at the harbor view illuminated by the city lights, "we did it." "Yes, we did," she agreed with a serene smile. Against all odds. They sat in silence for a few moments, simply absorbing their shared accomplishment and the beauty of the night. "Peter seems like a good man," Richard remarked finally. "He is," Jennifer confirmed, appreciating her ex-husband's maturity and mentioning her companion without resentment. "Smart, passionate about history, a good listener." "You deserve that," Richard said sincerely. "Someone who truly sees you, who listens to you." The observation caught her off guard with its frankness. "Richard, Peter and I are just friends," she clarified. "Colleagues, really. We're not romantically involved." Now it was his turn to be surprised. "Oh, I thought the way you two interacted, it's how I interact with people who respect my space and my ideas," Jennifer explained with a gentle smile. "Something I'm relearning to recognize and value." Richard absorbed the information quietly, his eyes returning to the harbor view. "You know what's funny?" he said after a moment. "During all these months working together on the project, I've learned more about you, about your talents and passions, than in years of marriage. Maybe because now you're actually looking," she suggested. "Or because now you're actually showing yourself," he countered softly. There was truth in both their words, a realization that brought clarity as well as a tinge of regret for lost time. "Do you regret it?" Richard asked, his voice almost a whisper. "That we separated?" The question hung between them, heavy with potential meanings. Jennifer considered carefully before answering. "No," she said finally, her voice gentle. "I don't regret it. The end of our marriage was painful but necessary for both of us." She turned to face him directly. "If we had continued as we were, I never would have rediscovered my passion for architecture, never would have experienced this sense of professional fulfillment, and you would have kept seeing only a fraction of who I really am." Richard nodded, slowly, accepting the truth in her words. "And now," he asked, "after this project, what are your plans?" "Robert has invited me to become a partner at the firm," Jennifer revealed. "It seems my community-focused approach has attracted new clients interested in similar projects in other parts of the city. Have you accepted?" "I'm still considering. It's a great opportunity, but, he encouraged her to continue. "Tyr's part of me wants to fly with my own wings," she admitted. "Maybe open my own studio, focus on smaller projects, more intimately connected to communities." Richard smiled, recognizing the determination in her eyes. "You could do it, you know. You have the talent, the vision, and now the confidence." "Thank you for saying that," replied Jennifer, touched by the sincerity of his support. "And you? Any regrets?" Richard looked at the lights over the harbor, considering the question. "Many," he admitted with raw honesty. "I regret not seeing your potential years ago, for letting the construction company consume everything in our lives, for prioritizing contracts and profits over real connection." He paused, turning to face her. "But I don't regret this new chapter. Watching you flourish even from a distance, there's a beauty in it I didn't expect to find." The moment carried an emotional weight they both could feel. It wasn't nostalgia for what had been, but a mutual recognition of the growth they'd experienced, separately and together. "I think it's time we go," Jennifer finally said, gently breaking the moment. "Tomorrow will be another intense day with the public opening." Richard agreed, standing and offering his hand to help her up. She accepted the gesture, letting him pull her to her feet. For a brief instant, they were close, almost like old times, but both knew the moment they shared now was fundamentally different, more honest, more transparent, free from the expectations and standards that had stifled their past relationship. "Good night, Richard," she said with a genuine smile. "Good night, Jennifer," he replied, returning the smile. "And congratulations again. You deserve every bit of praise you received today." Jennifer watched as he walked away, greeting the few remaining guests before leaving. A sense of closure washed over her, not just from the project's success, but from this chapter of her personal life. 6 months ago, she had handed over divorce papers during what should have been an anniversary celebration. That night, she had uttered the words, "It was good while it lasted," with a mix of determination and sorrow. Now, those same words held a different, gentler meaning. It had been good, truly. And despite the pain and missteps, that marriage had led her to this moment, to this more complete and fulfilled version of herself. A journey that, even with its detours and obstacles, had been worth it. The next morning, the Harbour Cultural Centre opened its doors to the public. Lines formed to explore the space that had already gained media attention. Jennifer discreetly observed people's reactions as they wandered through the carefully designed spaces. Families with children, students, elderly visitors, tourists, all found something that sparked their interest and admiration. Mrs. Sheila's cafe was packed, with curious customers eager to try the famous coffee now part of the cultural experience. The elderly woman, assisted by family, seemed rejuvenated by the new energy filling the space that had been her small refuge for decades. "It's like a dream, isn't it?" Robert Stevens's voice surprised Jennifer, who had been absorbed in watching the crowd. "A dream come true," she agreed, turning to the mentor who had become a friend and partner. "I still can't quite believe it." "Well, believe it," he insisted, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And get ready, because this is just the beginning. My phone hasn't stopped ringing since yesterday. Everyone wants to know who Jennifer Taylor is and how to get her services." She laughed, still uneasy with the sudden attention. "Speaking of which," Robert continued, his tone shifting to something more formal, "we need to talk about my proposal. The partnership at the firm. I know, Jennifer nodded, and I deeply appreciate the offer, Robert. Indeed, but you're thinking about opening your own studio, he finished, surprising her. Richard mentioned you were considering that possibility. Jennifer blinked, startled that her ex-husband had shared that private conversation. Don't be upset with him, Nathan quickly clarified. Actually, he came to defend the idea. He said you have your own vision and deserve a space where you can freely bring it to life. The revelation touched Jennifer deeply. Even after the divorce, even knowing she was considering turning down the partnership with his firm, Richard had supported her independence. And do you agree? She asked, curious about Nathan's reaction. At first, no, admitted the veteran architect with an ironic smile. I'm a stubborn old man, you know. I wanted to keep you under my wing, make use of your talent. But after thinking it over, yes, I agree with him. Nathan paused, watching the flow of visitors around them. This project, he continued, gesturing broadly at the space, bears your mark in every detail. Your unique perspective, your sensitivity to the balance between preservation and innovation, your ability to truly listen to people. It would be selfish of me to try to fit that within the structure of my firm. Jennifer felt tears forming, moved by the recognition. So, instead of a partnership, Nathan proposed, how about mentorship? I could help you establish your own studio, introduce you to important contacts, guide you through the administrative aspects that are always a challenge for creative architects. That would be perfect, Jennifer replied, her voice thick, with emotion. Thank you, Nathan, for everything. Don't thank me yet, he joked. I'll be a demanding mentor. They laughed together, watching the growing crowd of visitors. Jennifer felt fulfilled in a way she hadn't in years. The path ahead would certainly have challenges, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready and excited to face them. In a quiet moment of reflection, her eyes found Richard across the main hall. He was animatedly chatting with a group of visitors, explaining some technical aspect of the restoration. As if sensing her gaze, he glanced in her direction, and for a brief moment their eyes met. It was no longer the look of husband and wife, nor even of ex-spouses carrying bitterness. It was the look of two people who had traveled a difficult journey together, and despite the stumbles and wounds, had arrived at a place of mutual respect, and perhaps finally, true recognition of one another. With a small smile, Jennifer gave a discreet nod. Richard returned the gesture before turning his attention back to the visitors. It was good while it lasted, Jennifer thought, but this time the words held no bitterness. It was simply a serene acknowledgement of a closed chapter in her life, one that, despite the pain, had led her exactly where she needed to be. The end of the story. If Jennifer's journey moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced personal transformation after a difficult moment? Your opinion is valuable to us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories.